My career sucks.
Sex just isn't the same.
What's my purpose?
Where did this fat come from?
My relationship is killing me.
I'll never be happy.
My debt is piling up. I'll never find love. Why can't I be like other gay guys? Hey guys, it's time to get a grip, stop whining, make a bold move, and do something amazing with your 40-plus gay life. Let's get to the show with your Tell It Like It Is host, Rick Clemons, who does his best to never act like a dick or a diva unless you act like one first.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of 40 Plus Gay Men Gay Talk, and it's the second one of the season. It's not Christmas, I know, but it's Happy Pride season, guys. And I'm so excited to have somebody on the podcast that's kind of a truth teller, explorer, smart one. She's working on her doctorate right now. Oh, you heard me say that right. Yes, we're having a female on the podcast, boys. So let's be good. Let's not turn away and go, no. What I love about her is she kind of calls herself a joyful little freak. She's a bisexual Jewish girl raised in New England. We can dive into all that. But what I love about her most is her new book, Queering Him, and the work that she does to work with men, especially men, through sexual trauma, pleasure and kink and all that sort of stuff. I just like this one fascinates me, and I want to be an equal opportunity podcaster. You know, I love my girls when they come on because they always deliver for us. So I'm so excited to introduce you guys, boys, men, to Katie Bogen, and I'm going to let Katie come on and say hi, and then we're going to get into some questions. So welcome to the podcast, Katie.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much for having me. I'm like delighted, flattered, and honored to be representing the femme on here today, especially for the start of Pride Month. So thanks guys for listening.
And she has a rough life because, she lives all over the place. When we're recording this, she's sitting in Paris. So, whatever, fine.
Yeah, suffering, girl. Such a drag.
Suffering through it. Like we'll just call it Katie in Paris instead of Emily in Paris. So we'll go that route. And if you guys don't get just look it up, Emily in Paris, figure it out. You're big men here. So, but I love the stuff you're doing. And, as a bisexual Jewish woman, why was this a call to you to really start to step into the sexual trauma, the pleasure, the kink, and helping men especially work through some of this stuff? What was your calling?
So when I first started thinking about writing my book, I kept reflecting on my adolescence and being a teenager in rural, small town, very conservative Connecticut. I know most of Connecticut, people think of it as blue, not where I grew up. It was a little red dot. And so I grew up in this small town where I was the only out queer girl, at least in my high school. And the boys that I went to school with were fascinated by my queerness, and they would perform a disgust about it that I don't think they genuinely felt. I think what they felt was curiosity, because they had all of these really thoughtful, genuine questions about, when did you know you were queer, and how did you know, and what's it like being interested in girls, and you're trying to start a gay-straight alliance, you're talking about being queer all the time in a way that makes all of your peers really not like you. Why are you still doing that? And they had genuine, heartfelt questions, and they would always couch this curiosity in this kind of social aggression. And I always had this question in the back of my head of, how many of these young men aren't disgusted by my queerness, but are genuinely envious that I get to live this out queer life and they don't have as much latitude or freedom to explore their homoerotic interests. Like, how many of them wish they could fucking be me,
Right, exactly.
And I wanted to write this story about bisexuality in particular because I always had this fantasy of, what if I got to have a close friendship with one of these curious men? How would my bisexuality have changed? How would his bisexuality potentially change or feel more warmly welcomed or gently held? Because bi men face so much erasure in the queer community, so much violence regardless of the gender identity of their partners. Bisexual people are at greater risk of intimate partner violence, sexual violence, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance misuse problems. Like, if you look at the health impacts of bi negativity over the lifespan, they're devastating. And even my research has largely focused on bisexual women and femme people, but I started writing this book and talking about the book and heard from so many still closeted adult bi men, many of whom are married to women, who have said, this book is really important to me because it opened a door, an opportunity for me to talk about my bisexuality with my wife. And there are all of these coming out processes that bi men go through over the course of their lives that I think our community just doesn't chat about all that often. So it seems like a good marriage.
You either have to be here or here in our queer world. And I realize there's a lot happening in like gender fluid and all that stuff, but the B in the LGBTQ plus does get a bad rap. Now, it's interesting that you brought this up. Not surprising, but it's interesting that you brought it up in the way that you did, because I'm sitting here listening to you and suddenly I'm like, it's rather interesting in my coaching practice right now. I actually have 3 bisexual men, which is not normally what I attract, but I'm like, this is a fascinating thing in my own mind because each one is figuring out where they fit into the world in their own way. And it's really an interesting journey to be with them because I'm not going to tell anybody, oh, you have to be gay. And that isn't the way I see it. I would much rather you be who you are, whatever that looks like. And if it doesn't fit the norm of anything, obviously not the heterosexual norm, so to speak, and it doesn't have to be the gay norm or the lesbian norm, but wherever you fit is where you fit. And it's so powerful to realize underneath that, and I'm glad you brought this whole thing up about the bisexuality piece. It is, in my mind, more traumatic to be bisexual than to be gay or lesbian. Because there's things on both sides of the fence, but that bisexual, people just cannot wrap their head around that whole, okay, well, why can't you pick a lane? Because people want, even gay and lesbian, like, pick a lane. I think it's so unfortunate.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And I think one of the talking points I'll hear often from, pretty bi-negative folks is there's bi privilege. They want to talk about the idea of bi privilege or straight passing privilege. And I'm like, if we have privilege, then I need you to explain to me our more deleterious health outcomes. I need you to explain why we're at greater risk for violence, why our outcomes after violence are poorer, why the resources that we're accessing are also bi negative and not designed to serve us. Like the health outcomes for bi people are so much worse than the health outcomes for even gay and lesbian folks, at least right now. I mean, we're talking about contemporary history. We're not in the heart of, for example, the AIDS epidemic. But
let's dive into that a bit because you brought it up, because I think some people listening aren't going to understand. So what are some of the bigger health psychology things that happen for bi people that, quote, don't necessarily happen the same way? If I'm gay, I'm lesbian. Give me an example there.
Well, in general, exposure to intimate partner violence and sexual violence is elevated. And I bring up this example because this is the clinical population I work with. I'm a trauma therapist and sexual functioning therapist in training for people who've experienced interpersonal violence. Bisexual men and women are more likely to be exposed to physical, sexual, and emotional abuse by an intimate partner. Their symptoms are likely to be worse. So the cascade of symptoms from not only post-traumatic stress disorder, but coping with PTSD via alcohol use or cannabis use or other recreational drug use, having co-occurring anxiety and depression, feeling socially or under supported. So like even when they are experiencing violence and facing these symptoms, they don't have the social resources to go to, feeling like they're facing this double jeopardy or double discrimination where they're not safe or fully seen in heterosexual and straight communities, but they're also excluded from and minimized within queer communities. It's this like constant barrage of not only the harm, but minimization of the harm from people outside of it, and under-resourcing to cope. And I really do think after a lifetime of being told by straight people and by your fellow queer people that you're slutty, that you're broken, that there's something wrong with you, that you have to pick a side, that you don't belong, that you can't be monogamous, that you're not to be trusted, that you're inevitably going to cheat, that you're a high-risk partner because you're going to give someone an STI. Like, you get this shit all the time in your intimate life. And then you start to internalize it of, well, maybe I am sick, bad, disgusting, broken, vile, etc., even to my fellow queer people who are supposed to be like my co-transgressors, right? And the isolation is so salient. it impacts self-esteem. And so bi people will find themselves in these violent relationships or these relationships where they're not being treated well and potentially have internalized these messages about their own sickness so much over the course of their life that they accept negative treatment because they believe that's what they deserve. And I'm giving a very exaggerated perspective, but
Sure.
that's like the narrative arc I could imagine as a researcher in this field.
Well, and it's interesting, Katie, because this is not just isolated to the intimate relationship. You said this very well. Like, there's this other quote, even if it's just psychological abuse that they receive from the gay community or the lesbian community, because you don't fit. And one of the things that I've heard over and over and over again from those that have come into my world who are either friends that are bisexual or people that I've worked with that are bisexual is it's really hard to find community because you want to be part of something, but even the bisexual realm, it's almost like, I don't want to talk about this, but I want to talk about this because it's not as, quote, as accepted as, oh, okay, you're gay, you're lesbian. Obviously, trans is a whole nother thing that we're dealing with right now, that there's so much trauma going on. So I'm assuming, because you kind of alluded to this, like when you were in those younger years, just finding your own community in this small rural area was like really hard.
So challenging, and you really don't have the luxury of being selective, which if you're in a space with a lot of urbanicity, like if you're in a space that's really progressive and you have a huge community of other queer folks, you can find other bisexual or pansexual or broadly queer people. You can find the folks that are going to be more accepting of bi identity, but rural queers do not have a lot of selection for who their social networks are. And so they're likely to face different types of bias and some of this bias. And I will say too, I want to address at least the concern about like straight passing bisexual people or bisexual people who are in straight passing relationships, because I'll hear when folks bring up bi privilege, this concern of, well, bi people can just hide behind their partners of the opposite or another gender, and then no one will detect that they're bisexual, and they can move through the world more safely, which doesn't explain the violence statistics, but also I think reveals a really ugly anti-bisexual bias, because if you dig down to the argument, what people will get to is when the fascists come, when the homophobes come, when we have to wear pink triangles again, when we're mass murdered or put in camps or whatever, bi people are going to run away and hide, and they're going to leave us, the real queers, to be the ones like rounded up and killed, which is, I mean, such a horror show just on its face that we're imagining this future where there's a mass extermination of queer people again, but also an assumption about the like inherent self-centeredness or like protective instinct of bi people, where like we wouldn't be on the front lines fighting for queer liberation. We would like let our other queer people and like comrades and fellows be harmed and not risk our own safety. It's an imagined moral wounding, like it's an imagined abuse that hasn't actually happened yet. So I just wanted to name that as well in terms of the social isolation.
It's an important thing to name because when you really think about this isolation piece, as bisexuals, the isolation, I'm going to say, is probably exacerbated in so many ways. Where the connection is to gay men is, so let's just kind of go through the whole AIDS epidemic thing. There was such isolation, shame, guilt, trauma, survival, all of that. And there's times that I have a hard time talking about this because I lost my uncle to AIDS right out the gate. He was one of the first to pass. Here I sit at 63 and going, I survived through that. Now, I wasn't I was kind of active, not active, because I was still in the closet, wasn't admitting. So there was that moment. And I got called bisexual a couple of times and people walked away, which is always so interesting in these conversations. Love my gay brothers, love them all. Some of you listening, you may take offense to what I'm about to say. But when we start going, oh, you're bisexual. No, I don't play with anybody who's been in a pussy. I just don't play with anybody who's been there. I'm like, wow. Okay. Yet You want everybody to accept you for who you've been with however many times. The discernment is so interesting to me. And here's where I believe so much of the trauma begins. We've been told as gay men, you're dirty, you're this, you're that, you're this, you're that, you're that. And yet here we go and we flip it around on other people in the same way. How do you help or perceive helping people who like this trauma, this sexual shame, all this? How do you walk people through releasing some of that?
Oh my gosh.
I know that's a big question because there's so many.
Yeah,
ways. And I guess
there's so many ways.
Well, it is, and it depends on how the person comes into it. So I'm gonna use an example of somebody came into my work, knew he wanted. I'm gonna just be really blunt. He knew he wanted dick. He just wanted dick, but he was very concerned about his relationship with his wife. Now, the ironic piece was they were much more sexually fluid than I initially knew. But he could not let go of the guilt. He could not let go of the shame of something was wrong with him because he was broken, gross, dirty in his mind, because he's a Jewish guy. That's what he had heard so much. On top of that, being Jewish, you're gross, all these sort of things.
Right.
So for me, when somebody comes in that, I'm like, okay, I got to figure out, where do we start? Where's the brokenness? What is the brokenness about? And where did we learn that? That's kind of where I try to go first.
Yeah. Where did we learn it? Whom does it serve? Yes. Whom did it serve at the time you were learning it? Can you think of examples of other people with the identity that you are curious about, or other, bisexual men or curious men who desire homoerotic pleasure, right? Who you don't think of as vile, disgusting, dirty, broken, etc. If you can think of those people, what's different about them compared to you? Like, why can you grant them full, graceful humanity and you are not able to give it to yourself? And I think doing basic self-esteem work with folks like that. And also, cognitive behavioral therapy has so many worksheets and skills exercises that you can go to retrain the brain away from these maladaptive thought patterns. Acceptance commitment therapy has all of these skills to garner about values orientation, where really one of the best ways to undergird self-esteem is to make sure that someone is moving from a place of values awareness and integrity. So if you have someone if you have a list of values words in front of them and they talk through their different values words, and you get them to actually explore, like, would having sex with another man actually violate any of these values? A value of justice, a value of fairness or equity, a value of love or affection, a value of community or family connectedness. Like, please help me explain how the thing that you desire violates in any way this fundamental value that you hold. And as they come to see that this desire doesn't harm their values orientation. In fact, in many ways, if they're an affection-oriented person, a love and care-oriented person, a pleasure-oriented person, whatever, it aligns with a values orientation. That shame can be slowly and meticulously dismantled. It takes a very long time, and core beliefs are really, really hard to detangle for folks. But we start by having these conversations.
Exactly. This is such an interesting segue. It's the same thing when you start talking about kink and fetishes. There are people who are like, oh my gosh, no. And I'm always fat and cool. That's not your desire. Okay. I honor that. But it's also very interesting to want to go have that conversation. Like, where did that come from? Because it's the same thing. It's a values thing. I had a client, and I know you do some of this work, so I'd love for you to weigh in on this too. Yeah. It's so interesting when somebody comes in and says, I would like to explore that, but I'm like, okay, take the but away. I would like to explore that because I would like to explore that. And you tie it back to the values. One of my last clients that I actually did some of this work with, I said, okay, we've already done your values exercise. I understand that because that's what every client does. First thing before they even have that first session here, I want you to do this little values exercise. And it's always interesting. Like, they say this is a value that they really want, but the gap is really big from what they're actually at, you know. Well, it was interesting because he had ranked adventure as like a 10.
Mm-hmm.
That's what he desired. Adventure is high on his value, wanted to have it. He was in action at a 2.
Okay.
So then when we got into the whole, let's talk about kinks, he's like, I'd really like to explore that, but, and we did the whole, no, change it to because, da, da, da. I said, you said you want to have adventure. So what if you allowed kink to be part of adding up more adventure in your life? Mm-hmm. And then we went into each thing that he was wanting. It was really fascinating, Katie, to see by this one little simple tool of this is a value that's really high. Mm-hmm. Opened up so many doors for him. And it took a few months of him like, okay, well, I didn't really enjoy that, but I enjoyed this. Well, guess what? Now we're opening the door of communication. Mm-hmm. So I'm curious, like you do work in kink fetish, and for a lot of gay men, this is an area they like to go explore and play, but they get shamed for it. They get looked down upon for it. Yet back to what you just said, what does it matter if that's what I desire and that's not what you desire?
Who's it hurting?
Who I am. Yeah.
Who does it harm? Like, I do think there are obviously skills that are useful to bring into kink experiences, even as a beginner. But what you hit on of, I want this because is exactly the question that I always want people to answer is, what is your kink or BDSM why? Why do you want it? What purpose does it serve for you? What lesson are you learning? Like, what does it do for your body that you find rewarding? What does it do for your psyche that you find rewarding? And there's this debate in kink scholarship and kink literature about whether kink, BDSM, and fetish interests are learned, if they are socially acquired through, socialization in these systems that we move through, or if they are innate and literally genetically heritable. Mm-hmm. And I mean, this is me coming to a disclosure place. The earliest sexual fantasies I ever remember having were about power. Someone else having power, me having power. And always for me, sex has been imbued with this idea of power play. Mm-hmm. I don't believe that that's something I socially learned. I believe that kink in particular was innate for me. And then every single one of these can exist on its own slider, right? Like maybe a power interest really is innate. Maybe your earliest sexual fantasies had some kind of kink or fetish embedded into them, but later on in life, you saw someone wearing a really beautiful pair of pumps and you developed in that moment, it's like crystal in your mind, a foot fetish. And that can be a socially or contextually acquired kink. And I think when we get to the question of why, we also tend to believe that like you need an answer that is correct. There are debates on this in the highest levels of BDSM scholarship, whether something is heritable, genetic, innate, or learned. So you can have an answer that feels meaningful to you. You can meaning make, which is like a valuable active process, but it doesn't mean it has to be like literally correct for you to find reward from these sexy, fun things.
But it's so interesting that you brought up the power piece because it's all about power. I mean, relationships in general, it's all about power in some way, shape, or form. For me, and again, I'm going to use a client who is very, I'm not going to say type A, but is constantly finding themselves in leadership, constant leadership, leading, da-da-da-da. Mm-hmm. Same with me, okay? Interestingly enough, he is submissive as they come.
That does not surprise me one little bit.
Right. Because there's this opposite thing that happens. Now, I'm not completely submissive, but there are times that I'm like, I'm done. I just like, not like beat the shit out of me and take control, but there's something sexy and very, for me, intimately and sexually, when I get to relinquish, quote, power, which is a power play in and of itself.
Yep.
I'm releasing it. I'm giving it to somebody else.
Yep.
It can be even, I'm kind of getting a little tinglies even as I'm saying this right now, because it's a total departure from who I am. I'm always the guy in work situations or, we go to a retreat or something. We get in the small groups and they're like, oh, Rick can be the leader. Oh, I'm like, I'm so fucking sick and tired of this. but it's because I'm a big, bold energy. I know I'm good at what I do. I am good at being a leader, but there's just times I'm like, I don't want to do this. And I remember the very first time in my coach training when I finally said, because we had just kind of gone through like, sometimes you got to work with your clients and realize, are they stuck in a power play in their own head and wanting to relinquish power? And I'm like, oh, that really landed for me. So we get into our small group and they're like, okay, well, we need to decide who's going to present. The first thing that somebody said was, Rick will present. I'm like, I'm actually not going to present this time. I'm going to give control to somebody else because I need to be a participant and just a participant. And the whole group was like, what do we do? Rick is always so good. I'm like, if we don't get all the points for this thing, that's okay, folks. But it's such a fascinating space. So I'm curious when it comes to denying those sort of things. And I see there's a direct link to denying our desires, our fetishes, like even in gay world, bottom top, I'm like, it really doesn't matter. Just go enjoy. But there are preferences, right? When somebody shuts that stuff out, I see that as trauma they're causing to themselves.
I agree.
Okay.
I agree. I think the rejection of one's own, not only desires and impulses, but pleasure, capacity for reward, capacity for joy, it's like deciding not to breathe. It's like spending a lifetime holding your breath, spending a lifetime only eating salad. Like, I just have a really hard time understanding why allow the shame to be the thing that makes the decision instead of allowing the pleasure or the reward to be the thing that makes the decision, and then dealing with the shame as it comes up, because shame is going to arise for all of us. We live in a very sex negative, puritanical culture. We live in an incredibly homophobic, anti-queer, anti-kink culture. You're going to do these things that you find fun, rewarding, pleasing, and sexy, and then afterwards you're going to have to sit with how you feel about the fact that you did those, and about the fact that maybe you even enjoyed them, you dirty, dirty person.
Yes.
And then,
So dirty.
Yeah, so dirty.
Filthy, in fact. You're bloody filthy, in fact.
But like you have to deal with it. And in the process of facing down the shame, I think is a skill that people can practice. It's like a muscle that you learn to exercise over the course of your life. And at some point, the fulcrum pivots such that reward, pleasure, and your own joy has the reins more firmly than your shame, your fear, or your self-disgust. And like, if you had to choose one of those paths or one of those lanes to live a life on, my God, I hope you would choose the pleasure path. Like, I wish that for everyone. And I really do see it as a form of like psychic and sexual self-harm to, over the course of a life, deny yourself what you genuinely desire. It's not sustainable, and baby, you deserve better.
I love what you just said, because the psychological and sexual self-harm, I'm like, what if we lived in a world of psychological and self-joy? What if we lived in that space? And I know we're human, so it's not easy, right? But it's funny you brought up the salad thing, because in my mind, I'm like, bitch, what's wrong with wanting to eat salads?
I love a salad, but
I do
like
too,
not
but
every meal of every day.
So years ago, and I'm not going to mention who he was, I had a mentor, a fantastic speaking mentor for helping me get better on stage. Every day, he had his tuna rolls, so sushi, tuna, and salad. Every day for lunch. Every day. I mean, every day of the week. It did not falter. And I was like, wow, that's kind of interesting and weird. So finally, I'm like, I'm going to say something. And he goes, you think that's interesting and weird? He goes, I find it joyful. I find it completely joyful. He said, so don't take my joy away. And that was one of those moments I'm like, okay, this is a thing I'm going to use with my clients, because anytime somebody feels like, well, but they don't think this, like, you're allowing them to take your joy away. If that's what he wants to eat, that's what he wants to eat. And I think this is interesting. Like, again, back to, if we don't allow our desires, I never call them needs, because I don't need somebody to give me a blowjob. I literally do not need somebody to give me a blowjob. Okay. What I desire is a really good blowjob. It's that simple.
Hell yeah.
and too often it is so interesting how we deny ourselves the simplest pleasures. And because of that, we open the door to trauma.
Mm-hmm.
And it continues for years and years and years and years. And it's so fast.
Mm-hmm.
So let's talk a little bit about Queering Him. Because, first of all, it's a great title.
Thank you.
I love it. Take us in a little bit without giving it all away, because I want guys to go get the book. But take us into like, this is the first in a trilogy, right?
Yes.
So I think my little bisexual girlfriend here has a wicked little mind, is what I'm assuming. Lots of stuff that she wants to get out of her mind onto the pages. So give us that journey into where this idea came from and where you want to see it go without, let's not ruin it for everything. But I'm excited to hear this.
Oh, I'm so glad. So I'm definitely curious about what are the kinds of erotic spaces that bisexual people can open up for each other when we are under the onus and the burden of all of that shame, that internalized by negativity, feeling like we don't really belong in the culture, feeling like we aren't fully seen in straight spaces. Like, what is it in particular erotically and physically that bisexual people can gift each other? And I think I really wanted to spend the first book in adolescence, when you are selfish and impulsive and reactive and can hurt someone, like hurt the feelings of someone who cares about you, and go, ooh, it feels good to have this power over this other person. And I recognize that that is sick. And I recognize that that is not a moral thing that I'm doing to this someone else, but I am learning how to be a person who wields intimate power. And I wanted book one to be very, very messy and adolescent. You follow the characters from when they're 16 to their early 20s and in college. And I wanted also to queer the kind of sex that people would initially perceive as straight. The book features a bisexual man and a bisexual woman. A lot of people would see that pairing and think that's a straight pairing. But if you read the sex scenes, they are fundamentally queered. And I think so many bisexual women have had the lived experience of being the literal door into queerness for queer men who are just trapped under that shame and feeling the burden of it. And even in my life, to the point where only after men had had sex with me many times would they confess, oh, I'm also interested in maybe having another penis involved. I'm also interested in maybe having another man involved. What do you think about that? Is that something we could talk about? Is it something we could incorporate? And so I wound up being like a psychic entry for these men into queerness, because I talk about being queer all the time, but also they would be having sex with me, like my body is in the room, we are playing, talking about being with other men, speaking in detail about their sexual and erotic desires for other men. And I know that bisexual women have done this, I think, beautiful and holy sexual and pleasure-oriented labor for bisexual men who are in the threshold and trying to figure out how to detangle that shame. And so that is book one.
It is such an interesting, like, fiction meets reality, because I've always had this theory, and I'm not gonna prove it with any statistic, but I've worked with enough men who have said, well, I'm just exploring, this being, gay. They've stayed with their wives, which I'm totally supportive of. Like, hey, if you can make it work, let's make it work. But it doesn't work at some point for a lot of people, because suddenly they're like, okay, I've had dick. I want dick all the time. And it's not just dick. It's, I've had that energy of male relationship. This has been the missing piece, right? What I find so fascinating when that does occur is suddenly they have this crisis of reckoning, right? The interesting piece is those same guys actually never really fantasized about being them with two women. It's such a fascinating thing. However, here's my theory. I think there's so many men who get off on two women because that's safe.
Yep.
But in reality, what they would really like to be experiencing is them with another guy and a woman. Now, maybe, but I think that the two women fantasy, the lesbian fantasy that so many straight guys get off on. And it's kind of interesting that lesbians like watching gay porn too. That's a whole nother dynamic in and of itself. But I've always maintained those guys are probably closer to wanting to try being with a man than they would ever admit.
Yep. Like how much of the attraction is not to the women, but to the proximity to queerness.
Yes.
How much of the attraction is this permission? And part of the crisis in this book in queering him is this young woman is like, I know that your interest in me has nothing to do with me or my pussy or my body or whatever. You want proximity to queerness. I am the closest thing in our little small town that you have to queerness. You find it erotically fascinating and you get off on it, and that's fine. I'll be your like sort of bisexual entryway fuck buddy, and we're gonna see where this goes for you.
I'll be your bisexual sensei. Let's just call it that. I'm your bisexual sensei, right?
Exactly. And then you have the crisis too, because these characters are adolescent, of this young woman who, when we meet her, is 16, putting herself in the role of a queer elder with legitimate wisdom when she's a rural queer teenager. She has none of the requisite experience to be guiding this man through bi-masculinity, which is fundamentally so different than bi-femininity and the bi-fem experience. And so she really thinks of herself as an authority, and in taking on that mantle makes mistake after mistake after mistake. It's a dense, fun, steamy book, and I really hope people get out of it what I tried to put into it.
Awesome. So I'm assuming they can get it anywhere that you can get books.
Anywhere you can get books, absolutely. The audiobook is out too. I narrated it myself. So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, she has a pleasant voice.
She does have a pleasant voice. I'm like, she's got a great podcast, radio, audio. I'm not surprised that I recorded mine too. They said, well, do you want to do an audiobook? I'm like, yeah. And they're like, well, you should do it. Your voice is the voice. And especially when I start going through, like, there's an alter ego in my book. Her name is Lemonade Pop. And when Lemonade Pop shows up, honey, you are going to listen to her because she has something to say. Nobody else, I mean, yes, other people could have done it, but it's such me. My character, my husband says, there's such a big black diva inside you. Some days I just like, I'm scared that you might just change colors and everything. And then what the hell am I living with? But very funny.
And then lucky him regardless.
Lucky him, exactly. I'll still have a penis. I'll just be a big black diva. So there you go.
Perfect.
But so this has been such an amazing conversation to have during Pride because it represents many things. But first of all, it brings the bisexual conversation to the forefront. I love the articulateness and the wisdom and the way you speak about all of this, Katie. It is amazing to just have this kind of a conversation. So is there anything you feel like you'd like to add one last little drop of wisdom to for anybody on any of the fronts that we've talked about? And I know that can be one of those questions like, damn, Rick, but there's so many things. If something you would like to leave the audience with before we wrap it up here.
Yeah, I think so many people put off some of the work of quote unquote self-improvement or that therapeutic work because they think, oh, I don't want to go into a therapist's office, or I can't afford it right now, or it's not in my plan or my schedule or whatever at the moment. There are a lot of values worksheets, cognitive restructuring worksheets, exercises, journal prompts that are available for free online. And if you are not at the place where you can go and seek full-time therapeutic care to contend with some of the shame or pain orientation that you've brought through your life with you so far, there are free resources instead. So Google them, use them.
Google them, find them, send Rick an email. I've got a worksheet I'll give you, like you just email me, rick@rickclemons.com. I'm sure Katie probably has some stuff if you wanted to contact her. We're going to have all the contact information for Katie. And because it's Pride Month and because I love the work that Katie's doing, if you want Katie's book, the first listener to email me and say, Rick, I want Katie's book, I will buy it for you and I will get it sent to you from Amazon. So,
oh my God, that's so cute. I love that idea. Thank you.
I do that every once in a while, and it's usually aligned with somebody I really felt aligned with, but it's Pride Month. Let's celebrate. Let's get more of these conversations happening. And once again, Katie, I wish I could just you're so far away. You're in Paris. I'm in California. I wish I could just give you a hug, but I could tell.
I know I want to give you a hug too. That was such a lovely conversation.
We could be doing Emily in Paris together. Like, come on, girl, let's go stroll. So,
wait till I tell you that my partner is a Michelin star chef. We literally could be doing Emily in Paris together.
Because I went to culinary school too, so that you just lit me up in a big freaking way. So, yes.
Oh, Rick, we have to hang out.
We have to hang out. Okay, my husband hasn't been to Paris, so now I'm like, okay, when we go to Paris, this is one gal we're gonna coordinate months in advance. Like, okay, we're coming this. You better have your little tiny butt there in Paris so we could have some fun. But anyway,
10,000%.
Thank you so much, Katie. Happy Pride, everybody. Next week, we're going to have another Pride episode. I don't have everything in front of me here. I wasn't as prepared as I normally am, but we like surprises. We've got some good Pride stuff happening. So stay tuned. Go out. Be prideful. Don't be afraid of what all the weirdos are saying about us. We're here. We are queer. We've been here since the beginning of the world. Go be yourself and celebrate you. Thanks again, Katie. So appreciate you.
Thank you. Take care.
That's a wrap for 40 Plus. Gay men, gay talk, where size doesn't matter. We drop our bullshit, get over our screwed up fears, make bold moves, and live life without apologies. Don't forget to join us on Facebook at 40 Plus, Gay Men, Gay Talk, where the conversations continue.